back into the wonderful world of commodities and money. So, where we were before, we've followed this journey that human labor has taken, this journey from the production of commodities to their exchange to the emergence of the universal equivalent, this sort of universal commodity that is traded. And then in our last discussion, we took a journey through essentially the separation of that universal equivalent. We have this origin of, gold as just being one thing like any other, traded according to, its perceived socially necessary labor, time, and value to bring it to bear. And then we have it as it becomes the universal equivalent, as it's sort of separated from its original role as a commodity, it becomes this price form. And then you have this emergence of price as a thing that is separate from value, that is separate from the socially necessary value, and that can actually go above, it can go below that. And this is going to be fundamental to how capitalism is then able to function, and how the capitalist mode of production works, this separation between value and price. So again, in contrast to the right-wing misrepresentation of Marx, where, they say, oh, well, the value of, they basically say that, well, value and price aren't the same thing, so Marx is wrong. Well, this chapter is, Marx explaining that price and value end up being different, and that is actually fundamental to how the capitalist mode of production works. So we've kind of established that separability. Here we can kick off at that last part of the previous chapter. The price form therefore implies both the exchangeability of commodities for money and the necessity of exchanges. Gold serves as an ideal measure of value only because it has already established itself as a money commodity. Hard cash lurks within the ideal measure of value. So yeah, just kind of restating this importance of the separation that price takes, and then being, once it is separate, we're then able to see lots of transformations in the capitalist form of production take place and start to take place, and how the markets function towards the ultimate ends of capital. So yeah, with that background reviewed a little bit, let's jump right into part 2 of chapter 3, the means of circulation. We saw in a former chapter that the exchange of commodities implies contradictory and mutually exclusive conditions. The further development of the commodity does not abolish these contradictions, but rather provides the form within which they have room to move. This is, in general, the way in which real contradictions are resolved. For instance, it is a contradiction to depict one body as constantly falling towards another, and at the same time constantly flying away from it. The ellipse is a form of motion within which this contradiction is both realized and resolved. So this is a chapter that is also kind of, this is a paragraph that is also a sort of beautiful summary within Capital of the Marx's dialectical vision, or our use of the dialectical logic here. The further development of this thing, of the commodity, does not abolish these contradictions, but rather provides the form in which they have room to move. So price becomes these contradictions between the different elements of commodities and their interchangeability and how they relate to one another. These contradictions are both raised to the highest level with this emergence of price as a separate thing, and they are also resolved within that. That is, there's a contradiction to it, but it is a contradiction which is, resolving itself, like moving forward, incorporating those elements, and resolving the contradiction actively as it passes through motion. And his example here is of the ellipse. I think everyone knows what an ellipse is. Circle stretched out, same kind of form that the Earth takes going around the sun, etc. in which, and yeah, you have something in which you are moving away from something and moving towards it simultaneously. And yeah, that's kind of his geometrical or spatial example of, you know, understanding how this contradiction within how these elements work within another, how those contradictions are at the same time made even more contradictory, but are at the same time being resolved, being brought into consonance with one another. Insofar as the process of exchange transfers commodities from hands in which they are non-use values to hands in which they are use values, it is a process of social metabolism. Here, Marx introduces for the first time the concept of metabolism, Stoffwechsel. This biological analogy plays a considerable part in his analysis of circulation and labor process. The product of one kind of useful labor replaces that of another. Once a commodity has arrived at a situation in which it can serve as a use value, it falls out of the sphere of exchange into that of consumption. But the former sphere alone interests us here. So it's kind of limiting the sphere of investigation for us. You know, we're not analyzing the commodity at the point at which it falls out of circulation. We are focusing here on circulation itself. So as we're diving into this phenomenon, we're not going to consider the use value. We're not going to consider its final use that's got out of it as much. We're going to consider it in terms of you know, how it is being exchanged and how it works in the process of exchange. We therefore have to consider the whole process in its formal aspect. That is to say, the change in form or the metamorphosis of commodities through which the social metabolism is mediated. This change of form has been very imperfectly grasped as yet, owing to the circumstance that, quite apart from the lack of clarity in the concept of value itself, every change of form in a commodity results from the exchange of two commodities, namely an ordinary commodity and the money commodity. If we keep in mind only this material aspect, that is, the exchange of the commodity for gold, we overlook the very thing we ought to observe, namely what has happened to the form of the commodity. We do not see that gold as a mere commodity is not money, and that the other commodities, through their prices, themselves relate to gold as the medium for expressing their own shape and money. So here we're again getting kind of a restatement that you know, we're seeing the exchange of two commodities, but one commodity is special, one commodity is being used to reveal the value, one commodity is, you know, here we do not see that gold as a mere commodity is not money, and that the other commodities, through their prices, themselves relate to gold as the medium for expressing their own shape and money. So the other commodities are, you know, through their prices are relating to gold, not as a commodity, they are relating to it as you know, the shape of their own value, as the shape of the value contained within them. Commodities first enter into the process of exchange ungilded and unsweetened, retaining their original homegrown shape. Exchange, however, produces a differentiation of the commodity into two elements, commodity and money, an external opposition which expresses the opposition between use values and value which is inherent in it. In this opposition, commodities as use values confront money as exchange value. On the other hand, both sides of this opposition are commodities, hence themselves unities of use value and value. But this unity of differences is expressed at two opposite poles, and at each pole in an opposite way. This is the alternating relation between the two poles. The commodity is in reality a use value. Its existence as a value appears only ideally, in its price, through which it is related to the real embodiment of its value, the gold which confronts it as its opposite. Inversely, the material of gold ranks only as the materialization of value, as money. It is therefore in reality exchange value. Its use value appears only ideally in the series of expressions of relative value within which it confronts all the other commodities as the totality of real embodiments of its utility. These antagonistic forms of the commodities are the real forms and motions of the process of exchange. So yeah, here we're kind of expanding on the similar theme, the gold commodity loses its aspect as a commodity and it becomes this embodiment of exchange value. Commodities as used values confront money as exchange value. So a commodity has this original use value, and it then it has its use, but the separate you have this exchange value expressed in the other commodity of money. And yeah, he's kind of saying the same thing over again, basically in another way. The material of gold ranks only as the materialization of value, as money. Again, this universal commodity loses its previous commodity-ness and just becomes known as value, essentially. Good. We're back to linen. This is how you know you're advancing in capital, is when he finally brings the discussion back to linen. You know you're in for some good stuff, basically. Let us now accompany the owner of some commodity, say our old friend the linen weaver, to the scene of action, the market. His commodity, 20 yards of linen, has a definite price, £2. He exchanges it for the £2, and then, being a man of the old school, he parts for the £2 in return for a family Bible of the same price. The linen, for him a mere commodity, a bearer of value, is alienated in exchange for gold, which is the shape of the linen's value. Then it is taken out of this shape and alienated again in exchange for another commodity, the Bible, which is destined to enter the weaver's house as an object of utility and there to satisfy his family's need for edification. The process of exchange is therefore accomplished through two metamorphoses of opposite yet mutually complementary character: the conversion of the commodity into money and the reconversion of the money into a commodity. The two moments of this metamorphosis are at once distinct transactions by the weaver: selling, or the exchange of the commodity for money, and buying, or the exchange of the money for a commodity, and the unity of the two acts, selling in order to buy. So yeah, we have our old friend the linen weaver, and you weave some linen, you trade it, you sell it, you get the price. In that point, you have this alienation of the commodity where you're trading it for value, and then you are then trading that value for the commodity that will be your final use value, in this case a Bible. And there is, again, an alienation that takes place as part of that exchange, before it then enters your house as an object of utility and satisfies the family's need for edification, the need for fun. Everyone has fun with the new family Bible that our wonderful linen weaving father has brought us for our entertainment needs. And you can replace the Bible for any commodity, whatever you choose to enjoy in your free time can be the Bible. But yeah, so there are two moments of metamorphosis here, Marx is pointing out. There's a metamorphosis in the selling, and there's a metamorphosis in the buying. The end result of the transaction, from the point of view of the weaver, is that instead of being in possession of the linen, he now has the Bible. Instead of his original commodity, he now possesses another of the same value, but of different utility. He procures his other means of subsistence and of production in a similar way. For the weaver, the whole process accomplishes nothing more than the exchange of the product of his labor for the product of someone else's, nothing more than an exchange of products. The process of exchange is therefore accomplished through the following changes of form: commodity, money, commodity. Here we get to the beginnings of what will be the great algorithm of capital, and the great algorithm that determines our lives long before any AI algorithm has gotten anywhere. So here we have the beginnings of it, and it is built out initially, explained in this straightforward and seemingly just sensible version of, well, I produce some commodity, I make something, I sell it, it should be worth a certain amount of value, And then the value I get from this thing that I have produced, I'm able to exchange for things that are of a similar value, that took a similar amount of socially necessary labor time to produce or create. We have, a fair market transaction. I trade my thing that I created for other things that I want. It passes through the stage of becoming money, but essentially we're talking about a commodity that I produce of a value being ultimately traded for something of equal value. As far as concerns its material content, the movement is CC, the exchange of one commodity for another, the metabolic interaction of social labor, in whose result the process itself becomes extinguished. So yeah, the essence of the transaction is, the money is just this thing. It's just this thing that's there, that's helping you, that's basically creating a path for you to easily trade your thing for another thing. But you're just trading things of equal value. It seems sensible. It makes sense. Now, breaking that down, C to M. First metamorphosis of the commodity or sale. The leap taken by value from the body of the commodity into the body of the gold is the commodity's salto mortale, mortal jump, as I have called it elsewhere. And here he says, as Heraclitus says, all things exchange for fire, and fire for all things, just as gold does for goods and goods for gold. And this is Marx quoting Plutarch. If the leap falls short, it is not the commodity which is defrauded, but rather its owner. The social division of labor makes the nature of his labor as one-sided as his needs are many-sided. So again, the social division of labor, as that evolves socially, means that generally you're going to be specialized in one thing. If you're specialized in one thing, if you're in a society, you're working as a cobbler, you're working as, you raise goats, you put horseshoes on horses, whatever it may be, but you're specialized in that particular labor. And since you're specialized in that particular labor, to get everything else you need, you're going to need to step through that process of, exchanging that commodity you make for money that will allow you to get the many other commodities you need. This is precisely the reason why the product of his labor serves him solely as exchange value, but it cannot acquire universal social validity as an equivalent form except by being converted into money. So again, you may be specialized in producing a thing, but unless you're a gold miner and you refine the gold yourself and you're able to take it all to market, like you're not going to be getting things in that form that's already a universal equivalent. So you have to take a step, you have to go to the market, you have to sell it to get your thing you produce into a form that you'll be able to trade it for other things. Because if it's not in that form, no one's, if I specialize in growing watermelons and then I need to buy a pig or whatever, it's going to be hard to go to the supermarket and trade them watermelons for, whatever I made, watermelons for dog food so that Pancake can eat food. But wait, let me adjust the camera slightly. I think just get Pancake in view here. Let me adjust. Oh, almost Pancake. All right, you can just see Pancake's butt right now. But there she is. There's our dog. So I grow watermelons. I need to buy dog food. I can't just trade watermelons for dog food. The dogs like watermelons, so then maybe I can feed them that. But if I want regular dog food, I'm going to need to go to the market, sell my watermelons, and I'm going to need to, actually get something out of the market to be able to fulfill my own needs. And again, so that money that you need, however, continuing up from Marx here, that money, however, is in someone else's pocket. To allow it to be drawn out, the commodity produced by its owner's labor must above all be a use value for the owner of the money. So you have to produce something that is going to have a use value for someone else, that the watermelons that I produce that I'm looking to trade have to fulfill a need for someone else to put money in them that will then allow me to get all the things I need for my personal needs. The labor expended on it must therefore be of a socially useful kind, i.e., it must maintain its position as a branch of the social division of labor. But the division of labor is an organization of production which has grown up naturally, a web which has been and continues to be woven behind the backs of the producers of commodities. Perhaps the commodity is the product of a new kind of labor and claims to satisfy a newly arisen need, or is even trying to bring forth a new need on its own account. Perhaps a particular operation, although yesterday it still formed one out of the many operations conducted by one producer in creating a given commodity, may today tear itself out of this framework, establish itself as an independent branch of labor, and send its part of the product to market as an independent commodity. The circumstances may or may not be right for such a process of separation. Today the product satisfies a social need. Tomorrow it may perhaps be expelled partly or completely from its place by a similar product. So this is a long paragraph here we're going through. It's an entire page of paragraph, but the essential components here are, now we are getting into the contradictions within socially necessary labor time. So we've talked about, what is socially necessary labor time before this. Obviously, this is why the right-wing discussion of like, oh yeah, it's equal, if that's how it works, then, digging with a spoon should be the same as digging with an excavator or whatever it may be. No, because digging with a spoon, as soon as excavators are available and can be purchased on the market and are there, that's going to change the balance of socially necessary labor time. And how is that balance changed? Well, it is that change is expressed through the market, that we're sort of starting to discuss and get into the details of the contradiction there. And this is something that is transforming all the time. As Marx says, someone may introduce a product that fulfills a need no one had or no one imagined before. This hot new video game is created that, suddenly seems like an amazing thing. It wasn't there to be purchased before, but now you're like, yes, I have a need for that. There's now this is something taken to rather elaborate extents in terms of creating artificial use values. We have this vast advertising industry that is constantly struggling to, create new needs for use values within all of us. And in doing so, they're, competing to make these things into use values for us, so that there is then the need to exchange currency, and that, the labor going into all of the business is socially value, or even is above that, because when you're introducing something new, there are obviously opportunities to get exceptional super profits. But yeah, this long paragraph, this detailed paragraph, is basically us diving into the beginnings of the contradictions of how socially necessary labor time is resolved and is balanced within these market mechanisms. So today the product satisfies a social need. Tomorrow it may perhaps be expelled partly or completely from its place by a similar product. Moreover, although our weaver's labor may be a recognized branch of the social division of labor, yet that fact is by no means sufficient to guarantee the utility of his 20 yards of linen. If the society's need for linen, and such need has a limit like every other need, has already been satisfied by the products of rival weavers, our friend's product is superfluous, redundant, and consequently useless. Although people do not look a gift horse in the mouth, our friend does not frequent the market to make presents of his products. Let us assume, however, that the use value of his product does maintain itself, and that the commodity therefore attracts money. Now we have to ask, how much money? No doubt the answer is already anticipated in the price of the commodity, which is the exponent of the magnitude of its value. We leave out of consideration here any possible subjective errors in calculation by the owner of the commodity, which will immediately be corrected objectively in the market. We suppose him to have spent on his product only the average socially necessary quantity of labor time. The price of the commodity, therefore, is merely the money name of the quantity of social labor objectified in it. But now and here again, this underlined in the PDF, and it is important. The price of the commodity, therefore, is merely the money name of the quantity of social labor objectified in it. However, Marx has already set these conditions previous to the sentence of, well, it may be that you're expecting more than you'll get or less than you'll get. That'll be resolved in the market, and the market is this mechanism through which the socially necessary labor time is constantly being rebalanced within itself and within different commodities to determine that. And as part of that rebalancing effort, obviously at any given time there are going to be certain losers and certain winners within that. There are going to be times where you produce too many of a thing for the use values that are there, and there are going to be times where there might be an absence of that, or there's less of a need, you create more of a need, etc. All of the things that can play into it. But when things are functioning well, when things are functioning in a balanced way, then when you break it down, that is how it works here. Again, the price of the commodity, therefore, is merely the money name of the quantity of social labor objectified in it. So when you strip away all those exterior elements, when you strip away, monopolies, monopoly profits, you strip away, those all those other elements that can go into that can distort it, and that are at our point in a very developed capitalism, there are a number of very significant distortions which play on that. But the sort of fundamental base at play there is based off of the socially necessary labor time going into it. But now the old established conditions of production and weaving are thrown into the melting pot, without the permission of and behind the back of our weaver. What was yesterday undoubtedly labor time socially necessary to the production of a yard of linen ceases to be so today, a fact which the owner of the money is only too eager to prove from the prices quoted by our friends' competitors. Unluckily for the weaver, people of his kind are in plentiful supply. Let us suppose, finally, that every piece of linen on the market contains nothing but socially necessary labor time. In spite of this, all these pieces taken as a whole may contain superfluously expended labor time. If the market cannot stomach the whole quantity at the normal price of 2 shillings a yard, this proves that too great a portion of the total social labor time has been expended in the form of weaving. The effect is the same as if each individual weaver had expended more labor time on his particular product than was socially necessary. As the German proverb has it, caught together, hung together. All the linen on the market counts as one single article of commerce, and each piece of linen is only an aliquot part of it. And in fact, the value of each single yard is also nothing but the materialization of the same socially determined quantity of homogeneous human labor. So, but before we dive into that footnote again, kind of restating there, so you can have a situation in which for the market under discussion, too much linen has been produced, too much socially necessary labor time has been expended, and so the market is the mechanism through which this will be rebalanced. And this will mean that the weaver will get less than he should have gotten, because there's been an overproduction of this particular commodity, because even if each individual producer did the process of making it in an efficient way, socially coming together as those things interact in the marketplace, suddenly, there's more of those things than there should be. And so that is going to then reduce the price a bit, and it's going to create pressures also to then rebalance that division of labor into other commodities and into other needs. And this is something that can happen precisely because we have had this previous step of alienation between the value of something and between its price. So its price in the market is going to go down, is going to reduce itself. And because it can reduce itself, that is going to help trigger, over the long term, that's going to trigger a sort of rebalance of the use of labor, a sort of redistribution of labor in a way that will ensure that it's being used in a socially necessary way. And here we have the long footnote from the Marx. We'll go through it here at the end of the paragraph. In a letter of November 28, 1878 to Danielson, the Russian translator of Capital, Marx made the following alteration to the sentence. And in fact, the value of each single yard is also nothing but the materialization of a part of the quantity of social labor expended in the whole amount of the linen. An analogous correction was made in a copy of the second German edition of the first volume of Capital, which belonged to Marx. However, this is not in his handwriting. Just kind of rephrasing a bit. I don't think there's a key difference there. Continuing in the text. We see then that commodities are in love with money, but that the course of true love never did run smooth. The quantitative articulation, Gliederung, of society's productive organism, by which its scattered elements are integrated into the system of the division of labor, is as haphazard and spontaneous as its qualitative articulation. The owners of commodities therefore find out that the same division of labor which turns them into independent private producers also makes the social process of production and the relations of the individual producers to each other within that process independent of the producers of themselves. They also find out that the independence of the individuals from each other has as its counterpart and supplement a system of all-round material dependence. So within this, shell of a formal system in which, I'm independent linen weaver guy. I'm a real independent man. I don't need anyone. I don't need anyone else. I just sit by myself, and through my own hard work, I produce my linen, and then I sell my linen. And I'm a rugged, independent individual based off of that. Well, actually, yes, you may have this division of labor. You may have this business in which you are an individual selling your particular commodity, but within that formal independence, you actually have a total social dependence because you are dependent on someone coming to buy that commodity that you have for sale, coming to buy your linen, and then also coming to again, at the other point, once you receive money from that, you then have to use that money on the market to buy different things. So you have this sort of formal independence, but in actuality, you are totally socially dependent. The only means of something like a real independence would be, in previous modes of production, if you were particularly lucky as a peasant producer or whatever, you might have your own plot of land that can maintain yourself. Well, then you can say, yes, I am truly independent. I grow all my own crops. I weave my proper clothing, etc. It's a poor existence, but it's, something I have entirely based off of my own work. But at a point in which you're stepping into specialized labor, there is no rugged individual separate from society. That is a myth. You are dependent on other people finding a use value in the things you produce and you sell, and you are also dependent on them offering the different use values you need. So you are entering and extraordinarily dependent on social relations. However much you may think of yourself as, this independent linen weaver or whatever it may be, or independent poet, independent any commodity you produce, or independent contractor. I've got my own business. I do all my own work for my own business. I don't need anyone else. No, within that independence, there is actually a profound socialization upon which you are deeply dependent. The division of labor converts the product of labor into a commodity, and therefore makes necessary its conversion into money. At the same time, it makes it a matter of chance whether this transubstantiation succeeds or not. Here, however, we have to look at the phenomenon in its pure shape, and must therefore assume it has proceeded normally. In any case, if the process is to take place at all, i.e. if the commodity is not impossible to sell, a change of form must always occur, although there may be an abnormal loss or accretion of substance, that is, of the magnitude of value. So again, to understand this process, as Marx is developing here, Marx is going to assume that, yes, there is at least a partial success in finding a buyer for this commodity, for the commodities under discussion. But as part of this process, as it plays out in the marketplace, there absolutely can be a gain or a loss of substance, that is the magnitude of value, as he puts it here, based off of something being in more demand, something being in less demand. And, again, that's going to be socially determined through the market, through all the sort of demands that arise for different use values, and as people look to, satisfy those use values within the market. The seller has his commodity replaced by gold. And the buyer has his gold replaced by a commodity. The striking phenomenon here is that a commodity in gold, 20 yards of linen and 2 pounds, have changed hands in places. In other words, that they have been exchanged. But what is the commodity exchanged for? For the universal shape assumed by its own value. And what is the gold exchanged for? For a particular form of its own use value. Why does gold confront the linen as money? Because the linen's price of 2 pounds, its money name, already brings it into relation with the gold as money. The commodity is divested of its original form through its sale, i.e. the moment its use value actually attracts the gold, which previously had a merely imaginary existence in its price. So again, the purchase is this moment where this imaginary value becomes a real value, in which it is transubstantiated and exchanged into the actual currency that you have and that you will then be able to exchange. Its use value actually attracts the gold, which previously had a merely imaginary existence in its price. The realization of a commodity's price, or of its merely ideal value form, is therefore at the same time and inversely the realization of the merely ideal use value of money. The conversion of a commodity into money is the conversion of money into a commodity. The conversion of a commodity into money is the conversion of money into commodity. Again, it's just taking the both sides of this transaction. And so money as a universal commodity basically takes on all the potential use values that can be exchanged for, and that you will use it to exchange for them. Realization of a commodity's price or of its merely ideal value form is therefore at the same time and inversely the realization of the merely ideal use value of money. Conversion of a commodity into money is the conversion of money into a commodity. This single process is two-sided. From one pole, that of the commodity owner, it is a sale. From the other pole, that of the money owner, it is a purchase. In other words, a sale is a purchase. C to M is also M to C. Every sale is a purchase. Here he quotes Quesnay, another economist. Up to this point, we have considered only one economic relation between men. A relation between owners of commodities in which they appropriate the produce of the labor of others by alienating the produce of their own labor. Hence, for one commodity owner to meet with another in the form of a money owner, it is necessary either that the product of the latter should possess by its nature the form of money, i.e. it should be gold, the material of which money consists, or that his product should already have changed its skin and stripped off its original form of a useful object. In order to function as money, gold must, of course, enter the market at some point or other. This point is to be found at its source of production, where the gold is exchanged as the immediate product of labor for some other product of equal value. Again, talking about the value of gold itself is determined, by, in this time where gold is the main value, it's determined by, how much does it take to actually get more gold out of the earth and transport it. And that sets a certain amount of value that goes into it, what it takes to find new sources of gold, etc., all the labor that goes into that. And that sort of determines it, but that can also change with different processes of inflation, deflation. This point is to be found at its source of production, where the gold is exchanged as the immediate product of labor for some other product of equal value. Again, so when gold enters into that circle, it's being traded for something. You're trading it for different use values, and then it enters circulation as this money commodity. But from that moment onwards, it always represents the realized price of some commodity. Here's another footnote. The price of one commodity can only be paid by the price of another commodity, from a physiocrat economist. Leaving aside its exchange for other commodities at the source of production, gold is, in the hands of every commodity owner, his own commodity divested of its original shape by being alienated. It is the product of a sale or of the first metamorphosis C to M. Gold, as we saw, became ideal money, or a measure of value, because all commodities measured their values in it, and thus made it the imaginary opposite of their natural shape as objects of utility, hence the shape of their value. It became real money because the commodities, through their complete alienation, suffered a divestiture or transformation of their real shapes as objects of utility, thus making it the real embodiment of their values. Again, more sort of repetition from Marx here, just again hammering in this process of the changes that took place with gold and this alienation from their original use into this measure of their social value. When they thus assume the shape of values, commodities strip off every trace of their natural and original use value and of the particular kind of useful labor to which they owe their creation, in order to pupate into the homogeneous social materialization of undifferentiated human labor. So this is a key one here. Let me find it on the PDF for us. Let's see, it's most of the way down. Okay. From the mere look, yeah. Okay, here it is. When they thus assume the shape of values, commodities strip off every trace of their natural and original use value and of the particular kind of useful labor to which they owe their creation, in order to pupate into the homogeneous social materialization of undifferentiated human labor. So again, this is a good summary and also expansion on what Marx has been building up to so far. So when these things are brought into the market, when they are exchanged, they are turned into commodities to be exchanged, because everything, it is in that process of exchange that it becomes a commodity. And in this process of entering into market, it loses all of its, original particularities. It loses all of its special elements that set it apart, that made it unique. And it is reduced fundamentally to this social materialization of undifferentiated human labor. It is reduced to value to one extent. Now, this value may change. It may be pushed down. It may be pushed up. Again, this is a market that is in constant expansion and transformation, and there are new needs. There are rebalances taking place within this. But everything that enters into it and that is exchanged within it is reduced in one extent or another to social labor, to social value. And so all these things are effectively made the same, and all types of labor in particular, what in previous modes of production was seen as something highly specialized, or there wasn't this, in previous modes of production, there wasn't necessarily this link of all human labor being the same. There would, the labor of a guild specialist would be seen as qualitatively different from the labor of, the common farmer producing potatoes or whatever it may be. But in this commodity form, everything is made equal. Everything is reduced to a measurement of value and rebalanced as one or another magnitude of that measure, essentially. From the mere look of a piece of money, we cannot tell what breed of commodity has been transformed into it. In their money form, all commodities look alike. So, as listed as assets were, valued up to X, everything seems to be the same. It's just X amount of assets. It doesn't matter if it's grandpa's table or, your father's house or, whatever it was. If it's just listed on a balance, listed in its value, it's just X amount of value. Hence, money may be dirt, although dirt is not money. We will assume that the 2 golden coins, in return for which our weaver has parted with his linen, are the metamorphosed shape of a quarter of wheat. The sale of the linen, C to M, is at the same time its purchase, M to C. But this process, considered as the sale of the linen, starts off a movement which ends with its opposite, the purchase of a Bible. Considered as purchase of the linen, on the other hand, the process completes a movement which began with its opposite, the sale of the wheat. So someone else there in that marketplace sold some wheat they harvested, they got money for that, and then used it to purchase some of this linen. So, at the moment of exchanging the linen for gold, it was also simultaneously the completion of the realization of the value within this other object, within this other commodity. Considered as purchase of the linen, on the other hand, the process completes a movement which begins with its opposite, the sale of the wheat, C to M, linen to money, which is the first phase of CMC, linen to money to Bible, is also M to C, money to linen. The last phase of another movement, C to M to C, wheat, money, linen. So all these different movements are they're taking place simultaneously within the market, and as one is moving, it is realizing the other, and they are realizing between each other their value in this process of exchange. The first metamorphosis of one commodity, its transformation from the commodity form into money, is therefore also invariably the second and diametrically opposite metamorphoses of some other commodity, the transformation of the latter from money into a commodity. And here we have another footnote. As remarked previous, the actual producer of gold or silver forms an exception. He exchanges product without having first sold it. M to C, the second or concluding metamorphosis of the commodity. Purchase. Money is the absolutely alienable commodity, because it is all other commodities divested of their shape, the product of their universal alienation. It reads all prices backwards, and thus, as it were, mirrors itself in the bodies of all other commodities, which provide the material through which it can come into being as a commodity. At the same time, the prices, whose wooing glance is cast at money by commodities, define the limit of its convertibility, namely its own quantity. Since every commodity disappears when it becomes money, it is impossible to tell from the money itself how it got into the hands of its possessor, or what article has been changed into it. Non ole. Money has no smell. This is alleged to have been the reply of the Roman Emperor Vespasian to his son Titus when the latter reproached him for obtaining money by taxing the public lavatories. It is a nice little anecdote from Roman history, which Marx famously, he would read like Appian. He has like a letter he's writing to Engels, I think I remembered, where he'd just be like, oh yes, after all my hard day of work studying political economy, I've taken to relaxing a bit by reading some Appian in the original Greek and in my bath as I wind down, just very easy historical study to wind down, but yeah, so he was quite familiar with many anecdotes from ancient history like that. Since every commodity disappears, so basically, and returning to the paragraph itself, everything in money can be exchanged for anything. The only thing that's going to change there is the quantity. It may be that prices of other commodities goes up or down, but all the other commodities are in a sense attempting to woo, attempting to romance money, attempting to convince money to to realize them, essentially. And even if some of those quantities may change, money sits there, and as things are in the money form, you have no idea what were the origins. Did that money start as something more or less valuable? Did it come from a urine tax? Did it come from selling fertilizer? Did it come from selling, pearls from the deepest ocean? It could have come from any of those. But as it's in the form of a pile of money, you have no idea, and you don't really care, because that money can then be turned into whatever it is you want. M to C, a purchase, is at the same time C to M, a sale. Every purchase is a sale. The concluding metamorphosis of one commodity is the first metamorphosis of another. For our weaver, the life of his commodity ends with the Bible, into which he has reconverted his 2 pounds. But suppose the seller of the Bible turns the 2 pounds set free by the weaver into brandy, M to C, the concluding phase of CMC, Linen, Money, Bible, is also CM, the first phase of CMC, Bible, Money, Brandy. Since the producer of the commodity offers only a single product, he often sells it in large quantities, whereas the fact that he has many needs compels him to split up the price realized, the sum of money set free, into numerous purchases. Hence, a sale leads to many purchases of different commodities. The concluding metamorphosis of a commodity thus constitutes an aggregate of the first metamorphosis of other commodities. So again, basically expanding on, the beginning declaration, every purchase is a sale, every realization of value is going to be one thing coming into the market, getting its value in money, and then that money is then taken and changed into other things. Everything someone buys, having sold their own commodity, is then the commodity produced by something else, just sort of re-emphasizing this interconnectedness and, how there is, in a sense, no final conclusion of this C to M to C, because every M to C that is the final for someone is the beginning of a C to M for someone else. So we have this cycle that is playing out across the market, across all these different social needs, which is then being constantly resolved and constantly set in motion at the same time. If we now consider the completed metamorphosis of a commodity as a whole, it appears in the first place that it is made up of two opposite and complementary movements, C to M and M to C. These two antithetical transmutations of the commodity are accomplished through two antithetical social processes in which the commodity owner takes part, and are reflected in the antithetical economic characteristics of the two processes. By taking part in the act of sale, the commodity owner becomes a seller. In the act of purchase, he becomes a buyer. But just as in every transmutation of a commodity, its two forms, the commodity form and the money form, exist simultaneously but at opposite poles, so every seller is confronted with a buyer, every buyer with a seller. While the same commodity is successively passing through the two inverted transmutations, from a commodity into money and from money into another commodity, the owner of the commodity successfully changes his role from seller to buyer. Being a seller and being a buyer are therefore not fixed roles, but constantly attach themselves to different persons in the course of the circulation of commodities. Again, a dense paragraph where Marx is basically restating the same thing. Every purchase is a sale, every sale is a purchase. This cycle reinforces itself. The complete metamorphosis of a commodity in its simplest form implies four denouements and three dramatis personae. First, a commodity comes face to face with money. The latter is the form taken by the value of the former and exists over there in someone else's pocket in all its hard material reality. A commodity owner is thus confronted with a money owner. Now, as soon as the commodity has been changed into money, the money becomes its vanishing equivalent form, whose use, value, or content exists here on the spot in the bodies of other commodities. Money, the final stage of the first transformation, is at the same time the starting point for the second. The person who is a seller in the first transaction thus becomes a buyer in the second, in which a third commodity owner comes to meet him as a seller. Again, restating the same thing, essentially. The two inverted phases of the movement which makes up the metamorphosis of a commodity constitute a circuit. Commodity form, stripping off of this form and return to it. So all these different objects, all these different commodities are putting on their form of a commodity, taking it off, putting it on again as they pass through different exchanges. Of course, the commodity itself is here subject to contradictory determinations. At the starting point, it is a non-use value to its owner. At the end, it is a use value. So too the money appears in the first phase as a solid crystal of value into which the commodity has been transformed, but afterwards it dissolves into the mere equivalent form of the commodity. The two metamorphoses which constitute the commodity's circular path are at the same time two inverse partial metamorphoses of two other commodities. One in the same commodity, the linen, opens the series of its own metamorphoses and completes the metamorphoses of another, the wheat. In its first transformation, the sale, the linen plays these two parts in its own person. But then it goes the way of all flesh, enters the chrysalis state as gold, and thereby simultaneously completes the first metamorphosis of a third commodity. Hence, the circuit made by one commodity in the course of its metamorphoses is inextricably entwined with the circuits of other commodities. This whole process constitutes the circulation of commodities. Again, saying the same thing. When it's exchanged, it transforms into this crystallized form of value, but that then needs to be traded, needs to be exchanged for other things, where the use value will be realized ultimately by the one buying it. And obviously, inherent in that is there is this inherent contradiction within all of this process that every producer is producing something, but they're not producing it for its use value. They're producing it to be exchanged for other things that potentially have a use value. And so, all the things you produce, they have to find a use value out there on the market, which is its own difficult process, and isn't always there. Sometimes there isn't a use value for what you bring to market. The circulation of commodities differs from direct exchange of products not only in form, but in its essence. We have only to consider the course of events. The weaver has undoubtedly exchanged his linen for a Bible, his own commodity for someone else's. But this phenomenon is only true for him. The Bible pusher, who prefers a warming drink to cold sheets, had no intention of exchanging linen for his Bible. The weaver did not know that wheat had been exchanged for his linen. B's commodity replaces that of A, but A and B do not mutually exchange their commodities. It may in fact happen that A and B buy from each other, but a particular relationship of this kind is by no means the necessary result of the general conditions of the circulation of commodities. We see here, on the one hand, how the exchange of commodities breaks through all the individual and local limitations of the direct exchange of products and develops the metabolic process of human labor. On the other hand, there develops the whole network of social connections of natural origin entirely beyond the control of the human agents. Only because the farmer has sold his wheat is the weaver able to sell his linen. Only because the weaver has sold his linen is our rash and intemperate friend able to sell his Bible. And only because the latter already has the water of everlasting life is the distiller able to sell his eau de vie. And so it goes on. So again, here talking about the social relations behind these things. When it may be that you are selling something, and a condition of that happening was this other person having made and sold a Bible to the person who wanted the other thing. There's all these different needs happening throughout society, but you are sort of separated from that. It is socially resolved. It is socially needed. It is a social process through which this is all playing out. But you don't necessarily have a vision into what's going on, because it is taking place through exchange, and you don't know the origins of the money. You don't know that the money you got for the product you sold was initially part of selling this other product, or that needed in turn to sell this other product. You don't see the chain of dependencies that lie behind every transaction you make. You only see the transaction. You only see the direct transaction is the only thing visible to you, and you don't see the complex chain of human needs and fulfillment and other exchanges that was necessary in order for your seemingly isolated transaction to take place and come about. The process of circulation, therefore, unlike the direct exchange of products, does not disappear from view once the use values have changed places and changed hands. The money does not vanish when it finally drops out of the series of metamorphoses undergone by a commodity. It always leaves behind a precipitate at a point in the arena of circulation vacated by the commodities. In the complete metamorphosis of the linen, for example, linen to money to Bible, The linen first falls out of circulation, and money steps into its place. Then the Bible falls out of circulation, and again money takes its place. When one commodity replaces another, the money commodity always sticks to the hands of some third person. Circulation sweats money from every pore. This phenomena, here we have a footnote, this phenomenon may be self-evident, but it is in most cases overlooked by political economists, especially by the average free trader. Nothing could be more foolish than the dogma that because every sale is a purchase and every purchase a sale, the circulation of commodities necessarily implies an equilibrium between sales and purchases. If this means that the number of actual sales accomplished is equal to the number of purchases, it is a flat tautology. But its real intention is to show that every seller brings his own buyer to market with him. Sale and purchase are one identical act, considered as the alternate relation between two persons who are in polar opposition to each other, the commodity owner and the money owner. They constitute two acts of polar and opposite character, considered as the transactions of one and the same person. Hence, the identity of sale and purchase implies that the commodity is useless if, when it is thrown into the alchemist's retort of circulation, it does not come out again as money. If, in other words, it cannot be sold by its owner and therefore bought by the owner of the money, this identity further implies that the process, if it reaches fruition, constitutes a point of rest, an interval, long or short, in the life of the commodity. Since the first metamorphosis of a commodity is at once a sale and a purchase, this partial process is at the same time an independent process in itself. The buyer has the commodity, the seller has the money, i.e. a commodity which remains in a form capable of circulating, whether it reappears on the market at an earlier or later date. No one can sell unless someone else purchases, but no one directly needs to purchase because he has just sold. Circulation bursts through all the temporal, spatial, and personal barriers imposed by the direct exchange of products. And it does this by splitting up the direct identity present in this case between the exchange of one's own product and the acquisition of someone else's into two antithetical segments of sale and purchase. To say that these mutually independent and antithetical processes form an internal unity is to say also that their internal unity moves forward through external antithesis. These two processes lack internal independence because they complement each other. Hence, if the assertion of their external independence proceeds to a certain critical point, their unity violently makes itself felt by producing a crisis. So here we're building up to the interrelation between this, the need for this relation of every sale is a purchase, every purchase is a sale. And these are integrally interrelated. However, he's polemicizing against this idea prevalent at the time that because every purchase is a sale, every sale is a purchase, that exchange necessarily resolves itself perfectly. No, there is space, and he's starting to open up the space here for this. There is space for a crisis. There's a space for a disconnect between the value of something, the expected value of something, and realizing that value in exchange. Because it has to pass through this money form, and it has to be purchased. It has to be taken up by money. So they're saying the number of purchases can't be the same as the number of sales. So yeah, basically what's going on here is we can take a step back here for a second. So these two processes lack internal independence because they complement each other. So there are two sides. There are these two sides he's building up everything of the purchase and of the sale, and they are related to. They are deeply interrelated. Hence, if the assertion of their external independence proceeds to a certain critical point, their unity violently makes itself by producing a crisis. there is an antithesis immanent in the commodity between use value and value, between private labor, which must simultaneously manifest itself as directly social labor, and a particular concrete kind of labor, which simultaneously counts as merely abstract universal labor, between the conversion of things into persons and the conversions of persons into things. So like this is a very long paragraph, and we're basically building up to this kind of first mention of crisis or of a potential crisis, which is essentially about a point where there's a potential breakdown in terms of this any one commodity being realized, having the value within it realized within this exchange. If suddenly there's no purchasers for it, you have a trouble. You can't always just like artificially invent new purchasers if suddenly the value of something is falling away. And so there's you can't separate purchase and sale in that sense. There's this unity imposed by the necessity between them, but it can be interrupted. There's this circulation going on, but you can have circulation stop for a bit. You can have suddenly someone is just holding on to money, is not putting, they ask it later. Suddenly it seems like a bad idea to invest a bunch of money in things. So they're just holding on to the money, letting the money capitalize with low interest rates or whatever it may be. And so that money isn't circulating. And so that's creating the sort of beginnings of a crisis there, of a crisis in circulation, where certain elements aren't properly circulating through the market, and so there's kind of a breakdown of that market process and a breakdown of the realization of value, where certain sectors won't be able to realize their value. All right, so so again, there's an antithesis immanent in the commodity between use value and value. Again, a contradiction between how it's used, the need to use it, and the value it takes on, that eventually it takes on a price form. Between private labor, which must simultaneously manifest itself as directly social labor, and a particularly concrete kind of labor, which simultaneously counts as merely abstract universal labor. So you're doing something, I'm a linen weaver, and I'm like, okay, I'm producing linen, and I'm doing it at, the rate that makes sense, that's socially necessary. But in a normal situation, in a perfect market, my socially necessary labor is just always getting its value out. It's, we have this perfectly functioning market, everything's measured, my socially necessary labor time is going into it and getting the value produced necessary, and I'm always able to sell it on the marketplace. And in that situation of perfect circulation, the concrete character of what I'm doing doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I'm making linen. I could be making linen, I could be painting, I could be doing pottery, whatever it may be. And it's unimportant. The concrete character of what I'm doing under the perfect market conditions has no importance. It's irrelevant. But if suddenly there is a problem with circulation, if suddenly there is a crisis, if suddenly no one wants to buy that specific use value that is the object of my creation, suddenly I'm not just doing any kind of socially necessary labor. I'm doing a specific kind that is not socially necessary right now, or is less socially necessary. So suddenly in the moments of crisis, the particularity of my activity, the particular aspects of it are reimposing themselves. So under the perfect market, it doesn't matter that I'm producing linen, but as soon as there is a crisis in the market, as soon as there's a problem, as soon as there is overproduction, whatever it may be, suddenly the fact that I'm producing this specific use value that is not in demand as much, it reimposes itself. the specificity of the commodity reimposes itself forcefully and makes itself felt by the fact that suddenly I can't get, the value I expect out of the socially necessary labor that I'm putting in, because it's no longer socially necessary, because its specific aspects aren't being valued as much. So you have this sort of perfect ideal where, everything's equal, but then as soon as there's a problem, boom, you're back to, oh, I'm making linen. I'm not making just anything. I'm making linen, and the market for linen is suddenly bad. So now it matters a lot that I'm a linen weaver. Previously, in a perfect market, it doesn't matter at all. I could be doing anything. But because there's suddenly a crisis in the linen market, no one wants my use value, I'm going to have problems with, getting the value out of all the socially necessary labor time I put into this thing. The antithetical phases of the metamorphosis of the commodity are the developed forms of motion of this imminent contradiction. These forms therefore imply the possibility of crises, but no more than the possibility. For the development of this possibility into a reality, a whole series of conditions is required, which do not yet even exist from the standpoint of the simple circulation of commodities. Here is a long footnote. See my observations on James Mill. There are 2 points here which are characteristic of the method of the bourgeoisie's economic apologists. The first is the identification of the circulation of commodities with the direct exchange of products, achieved simply by abstracting from their differences. The second is the attempt to explain away the contradictions of the capitalist process of production by dissolving the relations between persons engaged in that process of production into the simpler relations arising out of the circulation of commodities. The production and circulation of commodities are, however, phenomena which are to be found in the most diverse modes of production, even if they vary in extent and importance. If we are only familiar with the abstract categories of circulation, which are common to all of them, we cannot know anything of their differentia specifica, and we cannot therefore pronounce judgment on them. In no science other than political economy does there prevail such a combination of great self-importance with the mouthing of elementary commonplaces. For instance, J.B. Say sets himself up as a judge of crises because he knows that a commodity is a product. We have chosen to regard the words into parentheses as explanatory synonyms rather than suggested translations of the German word Umlauf. The use of the word currency for circulation of money was old-fashioned. So side note, criticizing some of the contemporary political economists, but again, we have here Marx is kind of giving a little bit of a foretaste of what has come, of like one potential way in which a crisis can develop. And he's not talking about, this is something that necessarily develops directly in this form, but obviously it can happen even with this simple commodity production and exchange. We are not yet at the point where capital is entered into the equation. We have not yet discussed. We are talking about simple market exchange at this point. We have not yet gotten to the introduction of capital, even here at page 209 of Capital. We'll get there, but we're not there yet. But Marx is pointing out the sort of potential that is there, even within this simple commodity form, of there to be a contradiction where the specificity of the product is suddenly felt, where you can't get the value out of it because it has, at the end of the day, it isn't abstract value you're producing. It is a use value. It is something that is built to be put to use in some way or another. And so someone has to get use out of it. Someone has to have a need for it. It has to have someone that steps in to purchaser at some point. And more than that, because he's talked about how these processes are interrelated, in the example he brought up where there was this interrelation through the exchange that happened between the linen producer, between the brandy producer, between the Bible producer, between all these people. If the linen producer can't get the value out of the linen, not only are they not getting the value out of the linen, but then the brandy producer can't get the value out of their brandy because the linen guy has no value to He doesn't have any money to trade for the brandy or the Bible or the other things he needs. So as soon as it breaks down for one, that can also have a sort of cascading effect where, suddenly there's, not only is one producer not able to realize the value, but that since all of these different processes of exchange are interrelated and interdependent, it will spiral out and prevent effective exchange, across many of them. Obviously, again, Marx is developing this at a very basic and incipient point here. We're just talking about simple commodity production between, individuals producing one thing. They are specialized, they are producing one thing, but it's an individual producing the thing, taking it to market, etc. All of that. We are a long way still from the introduction of actual capital, from the introduction of credit, from the introduction of all these other elements that will have an impact on circulation, and that can also bring some of their own inherent tendencies and different tendencies towards crisis. Marx is pointing out here that within the contradiction inherent in exchange, there is the potential for crisis. There is the potential for it to break down if something can't be realized. And that is something that will then sort of come up later, and is a point at which certain other tendencies towards crisis or certain other contradictions can play into and be affected by. All right, next to B, the circulation of money. Let's see how long this part is. Let's see, 10 pages. Am I up for 10 pages? I think so. We'll try and get through these 10 pages. This is a long chapter, so we gotta put in some work to get through it. All right, the circulation of money. The change of form through which the metabolism of the products of labor is accomplished, C to M to C, commodity to money to commodity again, requires that a given value shall form the starting point of the process, in the shape of a commodity, and that it shall return to the same point in the shape of a commodity. This movement of commodities is therefore a circuit. On the other hand, the form of this movement excludes money from the circuit. The result of the movement is not the return of the money, but its continued removal further and further away from its starting point. As long as the seller sticks fast to his money, water. As long as the seller sticks fast to his money, which is the transformed shape of his commodity, that commodity is still at the stage of the first metamorphoses. In other words, it has completed only the first half of its circulatory course. Once the process of selling in order to buy is complete, the money again leaves the hands of its original possessor. Of course, if the weaver, having bought the Bible, sells more linen, money comes back into his hands. But this return is not a result of the circulation of the first 20 yards of linen. That circulation rather removed money from the hands of the weaver and placed it in those of the Bible pusher. The return of money to the weaver results only from the renewal or repetition of the same process of circulation with a fresh commodity, and it ends in the same way as the previous process. Hence, the movement directly imparted to money by the circulation of commodities takes the form of a constant removal from its starting point. A path followed from the hands of one commodity owner into those of another. This path is its circulation, currency, correlama. So basically, talking about here that, all these other commodities are traded, turned into money, but money in particular is constantly circulating. It's constantly being passed from hand to hand to hand, and so it is in constant motion, and it is the element within these that is remaining in this continuous motion, this continuous flow. And that needs to do so, of course, for the market to function, to not break down. The circulation of money is the constant and monotonous repetition of the same process. The commodity is always in the hands of the seller. The money, as a means of purchase, always in the hands of the buyer. And money serves as a means of purchase by realizing the price of the commodity. By doing this, it transfers the commodity from the seller to the buyer, and removes the money from the hands of the buyer into those of the seller, where it again goes through the same process with another commodity. Again, just saying in a long way, like the money is constantly in motion, it's constantly changing hands, it's going from one circuit to the next circuit to the next circuit, and it's facilitating all of these circuits. That this one-sided form of motion of the money arises out of the two-sided form of motion of the commodity is a circumstance which is hidden from view. The very nature of the circulation of commodities produces a semblance of the opposite. The first metamorphosis of a commodity is visibly not only the money's movement, but also that of the commodity itself. In the second metamorphosis, on the contrary, the movement appears to us as the movement of the money alone. In the first phase of its circulation, the commodity changes places with the money. Thereupon, the commodity, in its shape as an object of utility, falls out of circulation into consumption. Here's a side note: even when the commodity is sold over and over again, a situation we are not yet concerned with, it falls, when definitely sold for the last time, out of the sphere of circulation into that of consumption, where it serves either as a means of subsistence or a means of production. So again, these commodities are ending up as used values somewhere, they're being used somewhere, and they're falling out of the process, whereas money is constantly in the process. Money, whatever is taking on this universal role, it stays in there, it keeps going, it's jumping from circuit to circuit and making them all possible. Its value shape, or monetary larva, steps into its shoes. It then passes through the second phase of its circulation, no longer in its own natural shape, but in its monetary shape. With this, the continuity of the movement depends entirely on the money, and the same movement which, for the commodity, includes two opposed processes is, when considered as the movement of the money, always one and the same process, a constant change of places with commodities which are always different. So from the perspective of the money, it's hopping to replace one commodity, replace the next one, replace the next one, replace the next one. It's from money's perspective, it's always doing the same thing. It's always exchanging places with one or another commodity. It's always taking the place of a commodity. And so for it, it's in a kind of constant process that is unrelated to the actual use value being realized at any point. Constant change of places with commodities which are always different. Hence, the result of the circulation of commodities, namely the replacement of one commodity by another, appears not to have been mediated by its own change of form, but rather by the function of money as means of circulation. As means of circulation, money circulates commodities, which in and for themselves lack the power of movement, and transfers them from hands in which they are non-use values into hands in which they are use values. And this process always takes the opposite direction to the path of the commodities themselves. Money constantly removes commodities from the sphere of circulation by constantly stepping into their place in circulation, and in this way continuing moving away from its own starting point. Hence, although the movement of money is merely the expression of the circulation of commodities, the situation appears to be the reverse of this, namely the circulation of commodities seems to be the result of the movement of money. So we are given this appearance, looking at things that, it appears to be money moving these objects, money is what's doing the work. But in reality, it is not, money is being moved by these different exchanges, which are being done to realize the use values, being done to consume one thing or another. But it appears like it is money essentially doing the work. That it is money through the circulation, which is doing all the hard work of taking one thing to another place. Again, money functions as a means of circulation only because in it the value possessed by commodities has taken on an independent shape. Hence its movement, as the medium of circulation, is in fact merely the movement undergone by commodities while changing their form. This fact must therefore make itself plainly visible in the circulation of money. Thus, the linen, for instance, first of all changes its commodity form into its money form. The final term of its first metamorphosis, C to M, commodity into money. The money form then becomes the first term of its final metamorphosis, M to C, its transformation back into the shape of the Bible. But each of these two changes of form is accomplished by an exchange between commodity and money, by their reciprocal displacement. The same pieces of coin come into the seller's hand as the alienated form of the commodity and leave it as the commodity in its absolutely alienable form. They are displaced twice. The first metamorphosis of the linen puts those coins into the weaver's pocket, the second draws them out of it. The two opposite changes undergone by the same commodity are reflected in the displacement, twice repeated but in the opposite directions of the same pieces of coin. So again, we are just having Marx restating in some long sentences and long paragraphs, basically the same point. The same point that we've summarized, that the money is being exchanged, but it's just it's being pulled along by this process. If, however, only a one-sided metamorphosis takes place, if there are only sales or only purchases, then a given piece of money changes its place only once. Its second change of place always expresses the second metamorphosis of the commodity, its reconversion from money. The frequently repeated displacement of the same coin reflects not only the series of metamorphoses undergone by a single commodity, but also the mutual entanglement of the innumerable metamorphoses in the whole world of commodities. It is in any case evident that all this is valid only for the simple circulation of commodities, the form we are considering here. So here we're talking about, again, so what we're talking about is limited to this simpler form of C to M, M to C, this limited circulation of commodities. The second change of place always expresses the second metamorphosis. So yeah, it's basically always, the money is always taking the place either of that first metamorphosis or that second metamorphosis, which is simultaneously, the second metamorphosis of someone else. You have this this network of interrelated and interexchangeable things happening, which facilitate this exchange, but it's not money doing the movement. Money is circulating as part of this process of exchange to realize the exchange value within the different commodities, and then to realize the use value when the commodity is purchased for use. But money is facilitating and making easy that exchange, but it's not the thing doing the work of the exchange. What's doing the work of the exchange is the value within them. Every commodity, when it first steps into circulation and undergoes its first change of form, does so only to fall out of circulation once more and be replaced again and again by fresh commodities. Money, on the contrary, as the medium of circulation, haunts the sphere of circulation and constantly moves around within it. The question therefore arises of how much money this sphere continuously absorbs. So here we're again restating that we have these commodities, we have these bolts of linen, we have these hamburgers, we have these video games, whatever it may be, that are produced, that are sold, and the money takes their place. But we're dealing with a society, at this point, we're not talking about a society with capital, with investment. We're talking about a society where there's just this, magic independent commodity production and exchange, with each producing their own commodity. And at this point, you're talking about, okay, well, I trade this, I get money for it, then I trade it immediately for other things I use, other things I need. There's no accumulation of money. There's no accumulation of value. You just have the money moving through and facilitating all these exchanges happening within sphere circulation, within this market of independent commodity producers, this sort of ideal world of independent commodity production. In a given country, there take place every day at the same time, but in different places, numerous one-sided metamorphoses of commodities. In other words, simple sales on one hand, simple purchases on the other. In their prices, the commodities have already been equated with definite but imaginary quantities of money. And since, in the direct form of circulation being considered here, money and commodities always come into physical confrontation with each other, one at the positive pole of purchase, the other at the negative pole of sale, it is clear that the amount of means of circulation required is determined beforehand by the sum of the prices of all these commodities. As a matter of fact, the money is only the representation in real life of the quantity of gold previously expressed in the imagination by the sum of the prices of the commodities. It is therefore self-evident that these two quantities are equal. We know, however, that the values of commodities remaining constant, their prices vary with the value of gold, the material of money, rising in proportion as it falls and falling in proportion as it rises. So if yeah, if there's a change in the price of gold and gold is a universal commodity, this is going to, obviously change prices, move them up or move them down. Given that the sum of the prices of commodities falls or rises in this way, it follows that the quantity of money in circulation must fall or rise to the same extent. This change in the quantity of the circulating medium is certainly caused by the money itself, yet not in virtue of its function as a medium of circulation, but rather in virtue of its function as a measure of value. First, the price of the commodities varies inversely as the value of the money, and then the quantity of the medium of circulation varies directly as the price of the commodities. Exactly the same phenomenon would arise if, for instance, instead of the value of gold falling, silver were to replace it as the measure of value, or if instead of the value of silver rising, it were to be driven out of its function as measure of value by gold. In the one case, more silver would be in circulation than there was previously gold, and in the other case, less gold would be in circulation than there was previously silver. In each case, the value of the money material, i.e. the value of the commodity serving as the measure of value, would have undergone a change. So here we're again just talking about, the real value of the currency is obviously tied to how much it takes to produce it, to get to market, and if that equation changes, if gold becomes easier to get, or if it's replaced by silver, which is easier to get, then that will just lead to prices adjusting based off of the, expected labor that goes into finding and producing more of that silver. And so too, therefore, with the prices of commodities which express their values in money, as well as the quantity of money which would need to be in circulation to realize those prices. We have already seen that the sphere of circulation has a gap in it, through which gold, or silver, or the money material in general, enters as a commodity with a given value. Hence, when money begins to function as a measure of value, when it is used to determine prices, its value is presupposed. If that value falls, the fall first shows itself in a change in the prices of those commodities, which are directly exchanged with the precious metals at their source. The greater part of all of our commodities, especially at the less developed stages of bourgeois society, will continue for a long time to be estimated in terms of the former value of the measure of value, which has now become antiquated and illusory. This obviously is not the case in a highly developed capitalism where we have 24/7 updates in commodity prices, which obviously it's things happen a lot quicker. Although there can be other areas in which those delays may come, or there are delays felt in terms of the universal commodity. For example, if there are, we may not feel as much with silver or gold, but there is certainly a delay in terms of inflation being felt. It's often, if there's production, a massive influx of dollars and that provokes more inflation, it generally won't happen right away. It'll take some months for things to be adjusted in one way or another to start to make themselves felt. So there is still a gap in feeling inflation, but it obviously doesn't happen with silver or gold in the same way today as it did back then. Nevertheless, one commodity infects another through their common value relation, so that their prices, expressed in gold or silver, gradually settle down into the proportions determined by their comparative values, until finally the values of all commodities are estimated in terms of the new value of the monetary metal. This process of equalization is accompanied by a continued increase in the quantity of the precious metals, owing to the influx needed to replace the commodities directly exchanged with them. In proportion, therefore, as the adjusted price of the commodities become universal, in proportion as their values come to be estimated according to the new value of the metal, which has fallen, may up to a certain point continue to fall, in that same proportion does the increased mass of metal which is necessary for the realization of the new prices become available. A one-sided observation of the events which followed the discovery of fresh supplies of gold and silver led some people in the 17th and more particularly in the 18th century to the false conclusion that the prices of commodities had risen because there was more gold and silver acting as the means of circulation. Henceforth, we shall assume the value of gold as a given factor, as in fact it is if we take it at the moment when we estimate the price of a commodity. So yeah, obviously talking about the different changes that can happen with the value of gold and silver, with the value of the money commodity, discussing some of the changes that go on there. But for rounding that off, we say, and henceforth we're going to assume that the value of the money commodity remains constant, or that it's remaining relatively constant, which is true at any particular moment in time where you are estimating the value of a commodity. Obviously, in time, as time is passing, there are going to be effects of inflation. There are going to be effects on that value is going to change according to inflationary or deflationary pressures. But for the moment of analyzing a particular commodity in exchange, and as we're going to take it in this analysis of circulation, we'll assume a relatively fixed value behind that gold. On this assumption, then, the quantity of the medium of circulation is determined by the sum of the prices to be realized. If we now further assume that the price of each commodity is given, the sum of the prices clearly depends on the total amount of commodities found in circulation. We do not need to rack our brains to grasp that if our quarter of wheat costs £2, 100 quarters will cost 200. Let's see. Oh no, we have a partially cut off page here. You guys will have to follow my reading aloud here for this page, which has been damaged somewhat. Okay, so if we do not need to rack our brains to grasp that if our quarter of wheat costs £2, 100 quarters will cost £200, 200 quarters, 400 pounds, and so on. And therefore that the quantity of money which changes place with the wheat when it is sold must increase as the quantity of the wheat increases. So the more things in circulation, the more money you need available to cover that circulation. If the mass of commodities remains constant, the quantity of money in circulation surges up or down according to the fluctuations in the prices of the commodities. It rises and falls because the sum of the prices increases or diminishes as a result of the change of price. For this, it is by no means necessary that the prices of all commodities should rise or fall simultaneously. A rise or a fall in the prices of a number of leading articles is sufficient in the one case to increase, in the other to diminish, the sum of the prices of all commodities, and therefore to put more or less money in circulation. Whether the change in the price reflects an actual change in the value of the commodities or merely fluctuations in their market prices, the effect on the quantity of the medium of circulation remains the same. So yeah, talking again, if prices go up, then you would need more money to cover that circulation. There has to be more money available to cover the exchange of all the different commodities. And again, we're dealing with a hypothetical that's still in a very kind of primitive form of capitalism out of which we are going to sort of build this going forward. Let us assume that there occur a number of unconnected and simultaneous sales, or partial metamorphoses, in different localities. Sales of, say, 1 quarter of wheat, 20 yards of linen, 1 Bible, and 4 gallons of brandy. If the price of each article is £2, and the sum of the prices to be realized is consequently £8, it follows that £8 in money must enter into circulation. If, on the other hand, these same articles are links in the following chain of metamorphoses, 1 quarter of wheat, £2, 20 yards of linen, £2, 1 Bible, £2, 4 gallons of brandy, £2. A chain which is already well known to us. In that case, the £2 causes different commodities to circulate after realizing their prices successively, and therefore realizing the sum of those prices, which is £8. The £2 finally comes to rest in the hands of the distiller. The £2 has turned over 4 times. It has performed 4 acts of circulation. This repeated change of place of the same pieces of money corresponds to the double change of form undergone by the commodities. It corresponds to their movement through the 2 diametrically opposed stages of circulation and the intertwining of the metamorphoses of different commodities. These antithetical and mutually complementary phases through which the process passes cannot take place alongside each other. They must follow in temporal succession. It is segments of time, therefore, which form the measure of the duration of the process. In other words, the velocity of the circulation of money is measured by the number of times the same piece of money turns over within a given period. All right, so here Marx is beginning to talk about the velocity of circulation of money. So, if you have all these commodities in the marketplace and you want to try to trade them all at the same time, well, at the exact same moment of time, you would require these you would require to have actual £8 to make those market transactions. Or if the transactions take place successfully, if the money is just changing from one hand to another, then there only needs to be a much lower amount of money available in the marketplace to facilitate that exchange. You only need the £2 if it passes through all the different producers, passes through all the different buyers. So this is another element that's going to come up in terms of the circulation of money and the sort of speed of that circulation. And this can come up, this comes up in economically as well, and also discussing more complex processes that come with inflation. And then obviously all of this has been transformed quite significantly by our current modern credit system, where obviously we're not even dealing with physical amounts of cash. We're dealing with a system where our bank says we have X, and then the circulation is kept extremely high because when we have a bank that is lending the dollar to all sorts of different elements between any given transaction, potentially even across the planet, essentially. But this is something that comes into the market, and it is something that can change if the velocity of the exchange of currency goes down, or it can also be pushed forward in some ways. Like, for example, Argentina historically has had very bad inflation, which had some benefits economically, not really benefits for anyone individually, but there was a sort of argument in favor of it for some time that was based off of, well, because there's inflation, everyone gets their pay, everyone gets their money, and they immediately put it back into circulation. They put it back to buy things right away because if not, their money will lose its value, which will be a problem for them. And it is a problem for them, but at the social level, it means that money is circulating through the economy quicker, which particularly was a needed tactic for the bourgeoisie in Argentina for some time, because you have a population that was kind of debanked in many ways, especially after the 2001 crisis in Argentina, for example. No one trusts banks because the banks, ran off with people's money or basically completely screwed them. So Argentina, after 2001, suffered for a very long time with a crisis of the banking system. In recent years, however, that's sort of kind of started to been resolved, the sort of crisis in the banking system, not because people have any more faith in the banking system, but they have taken on faith in these digital wallets and Mercado Pago and different, basically, digital banks to store their money, which makes it possible to get some of the same benefits from a modern credit system in an economy where people don't trust the banks whatsoever. So there's been this sort of restoration of faith in a new banking system in Argentina, which means that the crisis of the need to force currency to circulate more rapidly is no longer there in the same way it was previously. But yeah, this is a sort of significant sidestep, but basically just to explain that there's an importance not only to basically Marx is talking about the velocity of the circulation of money, and that depending on how many transactions are happening, that can change the level of money needed to actually facilitate these commodity exchanges that are taking place throughout this market. All right, picking back up. So the sum of the prices to be realized is £8. The number of times the £2 turns over during the day is 4, and the quantity of money in circulation is 2. Hence, for a given interval of time during the process of circulation, we have the following equation. Sorry, my cat wants to go to the bathroom. Quick break for that. And that will all right. Door's been opened for the cat. The cat can circulate just like money can. Hence, for a given interval of time during the process of circulation, we have the following equation. The quantity of money functioning as the circulant medium is equivalent to the sum of the prices of the commodities divided by the number of times coins of the same denomination turn over. This law holds generally. The process of circulation in a given country is made up, on the one hand, of numerous isolated and simultaneous partial metamorphoses. Sales and purchases running parallel to each other, in which each coin changes its position only once or performs only one act of circulation. On the other hand, it is made up of many distinct series of metamorphoses, partly running parallel, partly coalescing with each other. And in each of these series, each coin turns over a number of times. How often each coin turns over varies according to the circumstances. Given the total number of times all the circulating coins of one denomination turn over, we can arrive at the average number of times a single coin turns over, or in other words, the average velocity of circulation of money. The quantity of money thrown into the process of circulation at the beginning of each day is of course determined by the sum of the prices of all the commodities circulating simultaneously and side by side. But within that process, coins are, so to speak, made responsible for each other. If one increases its velocity of circulation, the other slows down or completely leaves the sphere of circulation. This is because the sphere of circulation can absorb only the amount of gold which, multiplied by the average number of times its basic unit turns over, is equal to the sum of prices to be realized. Hence, if the number of acts of circulation performed by the separate pieces increases, the total number of those pieces in circulation diminishes. The number of acts of circulation diminishes, the total number of pieces increases. Since the quantity of money which can function as a means of circulation is fixed for a given average velocity of circulation, one is only to throw a given quantity of £1 notes into circulation in order to extract the same number of sovereigns from it. This trick is well known to all banks. So here, just talking about, like, again, you have this total quantity, but if you have a coin that's circulating more and more, or circulating at a rate above average, it is punching above its weight. It's taking up more space than is available to, then would be taken by others, and the effect is the same as if, on average they were all taking up more. And if the number of acts of circulation diminishes, the total number of pieces increase. Since the quantity of money which can function as means of circulation is fixed for a given average velocity of circulation, you only have to throw a given quantity of pounds to extract a certain number of sovereigns from it. So it basically just, again, explaining more on the circulation of money and how that's, its velocity. The more velocity you have to the circulation, the less actual quantity of money you're going to need in there to make it work. Just as the circulation of money is in general merely a reflection of the process of circulation of commodities, i.e. their circular path through diametrically opposed metamorphoses, so too the velocity of circulation of money is merely a reflection of the rapidity with which commodities change their forms. The continuous interlocking of the series of metamorphoses, the hurried nature of society's metabolic process, the quick disappearance of commodities from the sphere of circulation, and their equally quick replacement by fresh commodities. So we're talking about the level to which this velocity of the circulation of money, and what is going to determine this velocity. Well, similar to how money is not doing the moving, but commodities are doing the moving. The commodities are going to be the ones pulling on, determining this speed, this rate of circulation of the money. Because if there are more transactions to buy the use values, to exchange the use values, to exchange the commodity you're getting the exchange value of, and then trading that to other use values, the more that is going on, the more money is being pulled, the faster it is going to circulate. So you can almost view like money as like this liquid. It's there in the pool, and then each exchange of a commodity is like opening up space that the water floods into, that money floods into, and if you keep having more and more of these exchanges, you are necessarily going to be speeding up the rate at which that liquid is moving through which the money is pulled through. But it is fundamentally being pulled by commodities in circulation. It is not itself doing either the pulling or the pushing. In the velocity of circulation, therefore, there appears the fluid unity of the antithetical and complementary phases, i.e., the transformation of the commodities from the form of utility into the form of value, and their retransformation in the reverse direction, or the two processes of sale and purchase. Inversely, when the circulation of money slows down, the two processes become separated. They assert their independence and mutual antagonism. Stagnation occurs in the changes of form, and hence in the metabolic process. Here we have another use of metabolic process. So, basically, if there's not these sales happening, if there's not this circulation within the market, if it breaks down at any point, this is also going to lead to a sort of breakdown in the rate at which the money is being pulled through the market and the economy, essentially. Circulation itself, of course, gives no clue to the origin of this stagnation. It merely presents us with this phenomenon. Popular opinion is naturally inclined to attributing this phenomenon to a quantitative deficiency in the circulating medium, since it sees money appear and disappear less frequently at all points in the periphery of circulation, in proportion as the circulation of money slows down. Here we have another long footnote. Money being the common measure of buying and selling, everybody who hath anything to sell and cannot procure chapment for it is presently apt to think that want of money in the kingdom or country is the cause why his goods do not go off. And so want of money is the common cry, which is a great mistake. What do these people want to cry out for money? The farmer complains. He thinks that were more money in the country, he would have a price for his goods. And it seems money is not his want, but a price for his corn and cattle, which he would sell but cannot. Why can't he get a price? Either there is too much corn and cattle in the country, so that most who come to market have need of selling, as he hath, and few of buying, or two, there wants the usual vent abroad by transportation, or free, the consumption fails, as when men by reason of poverty. So yeah, here we have kind of another very long quote from an older political economist, but just emphasizing the same point being made here, that it's not. There was a significant period of time where there were actually like full political movements where people would demand, that we adopt silver instead of gold, or there needs to be an introduction of more money. But Marx is pointing out and agreeing with these previous political economists that no, it's not more money that's being looked for as the solution. It is actually, there's a farmer who is trying to sell stuff. He wants there to be more money to sell it to, but what he actually wants is a customer for the grain. He actually, the driving process are these commodities, not the money again. Marx sort of acting in continuity with some of this previous analysis. The total quantity of money functioning during a given period as the circulating medium is determined on the one hand by the sum of the prices of the commodities in circulation, and on the other hand by the rapidity of alternation of the antithetical processes of circulation. The proportion of the sum of the prices which can on average be realized by each single coin depends on this rapidity of alternation, but the sum of the prices of the commodities depends on the quantity, as well as on the price, of each kind of commodity. These three factors, the movement of prices, the quantity of commodities in circulation, and the velocity of circulation of money, can all vary in various directions under different conditions, hence the sum of the prices to be realized, and consequently the quantity of the circulating medium conditioned by that sum will vary with the very numerous variations of the three factors in combination. Here we shall outline only the most important variations in the history of commodity prices. While prices remain constant, the quantity of the circulating medium may increase owing to an increase in the number of commodities in circulation, or a decrease in the velocity of circulation of money, or a combination of the two. On the other hand, the quantity of the circulating medium may decrease with a decreasing number of commodities, or with an increasing rapidity of circulation. With a general rise in the prices of commodities, the quantity of the circulating medium will remain constant. if the number of commodities in circulation decreases proportionally to the increase in their prices, or if the velocity of monetary circulation increases at the same rate as prices rise, the number of commodities in circulation remaining constant. The quantity of the circulating medium may decrease owing to a more rapid decrease in the number of commodities, or to a more rapid increase in the velocity of monetary circulation in comparison with the fall in the prices of commodities. So here again, Marx is just sort of emphasizing the different ways in which this can play out. If either circulation falls, or if it increases, or if there are changes in the value of the money commodity, basically emphasizing the different ways that those can change and play out. And here we have a few more. With the general fall in the prices of commodities, the quantity of the circulating medium will remain constant. If the number of commodities increases proportionally to their fall in price, or if the velocity of monetary circulation decreases in the same proportion. The quantity of the circulating medium will increase if the number of commodities increases more quickly, or the rapidity of circulation decreases more quickly than the prices fall. The variations of the different factors may be mutually compensatory, so that notwithstanding their continued instability, the sum of the prices to be realized and the quantity of money in circulation remains constant. Consequently, we find, especially if we take long periods into consideration, that the quantity of money in circulation in each country diverges far less from its average level than we should at first sight have expected, with the exception of the violent perturbations which arise periodically either from crises in production and commerce, or more rarely from changes in the value of money itself. So he's emphasizing, yes, there are also, the additional things that will come in that are very important at the crisis of production, or you can have a certain inflationary or deflationary spirals caused by one or another element. But it is, those are going to come in, but there are also these sort of transformations that are largely natural, dependent on the rate of the circulation, the rapidity of circulation, and that will impact how effectively, how fast things are passing through, and how much money is needed to pass through that. And he's saying that under these different circumstances, you'll see that countries largely are aligning more or less with these processes. The law that the quantity of the circulating medium is determined by the sum of the prices of the commodities in circulation and the average velocity of the circulation of money may also be stated as follows. Here's a good summary to focus on. Given the sum of the values of commodities and the average rapidity of their metamorphoses, the quantity of money, or of the material of money in circulation, depends on its own value. The illusion that it is, on the contrary, prices which are determined by the quantity of the circulating medium, and that the latter, for its part, depends on the amount of monetary material which happens to be present in a country, had its root in the absurd hypothesis adopted by the original representatives of this view, that commodities enter into the process of circulation without a price, and money enters without a value. And that the president has its roots in the absurd adopted by original representatives of its view that commodities enter into the process of circulation without a price, and money enters without a value, and that once they have entered circulation, an aliquot part of the medley of commodities is exchanged for an aliquot part of the heap of precious metals. So again, Marx here is polemicizing with these different earlier views, because, particularly within the history of political economy, there were a whole series of schools of political economy that came before. There were those who, thought that real value was just in money. There were the physiocrats afterwards. Marx is quoting some of these, debating with others. And here he is, again, debating, arguing against the sort of previous view, which sees things as, money is the real value. Money is what determines the value of things. Rather than the things are having their value realized through the market, through the medium of money. We have a few long footnotes here, but these are mostly quotations from similar previous political economists. We also see The Wealth of Nations come in, which Marx does read quite a lot. He has a lot of notes on Wealth of Nations, which is an interesting book to read as well. It's not... It doesn't agree necessarily with a lot of how certain publicists of capitalism like to portray it. It is more interesting and useful than how they portray it. And Smith has some interesting thoughts on landlords, famously. All right, so here we arrive at section C, finally. And I think we will call it here for tonight. There's just a few pages before we start on part 3, but these have been some dense pages. And I think we will let this stew for a bit, and we will come back to finish up this discussion of the circulation of money. And then after a few pages, we will be diving into, see if I can get here, part 3, money, which will talk more about money, but is also going to talk about certain contradictions, for example, hoarding. It will discuss and some other elements that comes into the process with money. But we are still not yet at the point where we get capital introduced. We are still dealing with this sort of primitive ideal market of independent commodity producers, yeah, we will later get to actual capital and the actual process that emerges with capital and the contradictions inherent to that. But we have seen, through this part, that there are already certain elements of a potential crisis within even this kind of ideal market environment, in which, again, this image of the rugged individual business person who owns a thing and then sells their product on the market, even this, ideal petty bourgeois American fantasy of you're this, independent businessman with your company, you do your work, you don't need nobody, you don't need society. Actually, you are tremendously socially dependent because, well, your commodities have to be useful to someone else, they have to be realized as value, and then you have to exchange with others for all the other things you're purchasing, and you are in fact deeply socially enmeshed and deeply socially dependent, even as you take on this air of formal independence. And obviously that is something that's going to amplify and be much clearer and more deeper as we get into later processes of understanding capital and understanding then the role that a worker will take in the face of capital, the role that his labor power will take, all of those things going forward, which we are building towards. But we are not quite there. We still have some more work through money, and we will continue that next Sunday.